Hi, everyone. Thanks for zooming in tonight. I'm Christian Cotz. I'm the CEO at the First Amendment Museum here in Augusta, Maine, where we help people understand and inspire people to live their 5 First Amendment freedoms. We're a private, nonpartisan, nonprofit museum, and that means we rely on the generosity of people like you. So if you've appreciated and enjoyed the programming we've been bringing you, please go to firstamendmentmuseum.org/give and make a donation that will help us continue our work, inspiring people to live their 5 First Amendment freedoms. Tonight, we'll be screening the newly released documentary, The Other Madisons. The film is based on the memoir, The Other Madisons, The Lost History of a President's Black Family. And our guests tonight are the book's author, Dr. Bettye Kearse, and the film's director, Eduardo Montes-Bradley. Thank you both for joining us tonight. Bettye was born in Tucson, Arizona, and raised in Northern California. She earned her BA in genetics from UC Berkeley, her PhD in biology from NYU, and her MD from Case Western. Bettye recently retired from her pediatric practice in Boston and now lives in New Mexico. Until recently, Bettye was a contributor to Maine's tax base as an out-of-state property owner on Westport Island. The Other Madisons is part personal quest, part testimony, part history. It's a triple narrative that traces the nation's history of expansion and exploitation and opportunity, focused through the lens of Bettye's family's experiences as they moved through those historical landscapes from West Africa to Virginia to California, and then reflected back yet again by Bettye's personal journey to better understand that history. And of course, at the root of it all is Bettye's struggle to come to terms with her family's credo. Always remember, you are a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president. Bettye selected celebrated writer, photographer, and filmmaker Eduardo Montes-Bradley to showcase her journey on the screen. Eduardo is a First Amendment story all by himself. He grew up in Buenos Aires, and while he was in college, witnessed the violent 1976 coup and subsequent state-sponsored terrorism perpetrated by General Jorge Bettye. An estimated 13,000 to 30,000 people vanished during Bedela's 10-year reign. Despite Eduardo's opinionated nature, he didn't disappear. He made it to New York City by 1980 and spent the next 3 decades as a correspondent, as a freelance reporter, and as a writer, director, and producer of documentaries and other films for various entities. In 2008, he founded the Charlottesville, Virginia-based Heritage Film Project, producing documentary films focused on social activists, history, and the arts. These include works on civil rights hero Julian Bond, poet laureate Rita Dove, Evita Peron, and Che Guevara. His pieces are shown at film festivals around the world. Excuse me. I was delighted when Bettye and Eduardo asked the First Amendment Museum to host one of the first screenings of this film. Not because they are both dear friends of mine, not because I have a supporting role in the film, not because many of my favorite colleagues from Virginia are in it as well, but because The Other Madisons is proof positive that the First Amendment works. In the 1920s, just 100 years ago, someone trying to tell Bettye's story might very well have been lynched. 50 years ago, Bettye's story certainly wouldn't have made it to prime time. Remember, it was only 20 years ago that the Jefferson Hemings story broke to great disavowal and scandal. It certainly doesn't feel like it at times, I know. But when you take a long view of historical awareness, when you compare where we are today with where we were 20 years ago, our society has really made leaps and bounds towards better understanding a more complete and inclusive historical narrative. We may have been starting from a very low bar, and we definitely have a very long way to go. But I'm certain that by insisting on telling these stories, the way people like Bettye and Eduardo have, the way museums like Montpelier and the Whitney Plantation have, the way that authors and scholars like Ta-Nehisi Coates, Toni Morrison, Ed Baptist, and Ibram Kendi have, will help us shape a society that understands its past. By telling these stories, by saying their names, we are using our freedom of speech, our freedom of expression to change our society and to shape that more perfect union that we want to live in. Now, as you might imagine, zooming from Maine to the rest of the world has its shortcomings. As my father-in-law likes to say, we have the technology. The question is, will it work? We are going to stream the film right here through this platform. And if everything goes well, everyone out there in the audience shouldn't have to do anything but sit back and enjoy. But if things start to get wonky, we are also posting the YouTube link in the chat, and you can watch the film through that link. After the film is over, we will reconvene for questions and answers with Bettye and Eduardo. Now I'd like to turn it over to Bettye to introduce her book and her movie.
Thank you, Christian. I have prepared a talk that I call The History of a Book. I am an American griot, which is spelled Griotte, meaning that I'm a female griot, which is spelled Griot. Griots and griots are oral historians in the ancient West African tradition. For thousands of years, generations of these men and women who have amazing memories have spoken the stories of their ancestors and the history of their people. This tradition remains alive in Africa, and having survived nearly 2 centuries of voyages to America through the Middle Passage, roughly from 1619 to 1808, it remains alive in many African American homes today. Without this enduring practice, I would not know that I am a descendant of the enslaved cook Corinne and her enslaver and half-brother, President James Madison. I grew up hearing and reciting and trying to live up to my family's 200-year-old credo, which is always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president. For me as a kid, it reminded me of how I was supposed to behave and why. Decades later, in 1990, when my mother, the 7th generation of my American family's griots, turned over to me the old cardboard box of family memorabilia, I became the 8th generation griot. When I asked her, why now? She answered in her slight Texan drawl, I want to give you plenty of time to write the book. I was a pediatrician, but she knew that I loved to write. Her intent was for me to write down the stories in order to preserve them. She recognized that as what our ancestors had endured during slavery and what her grandfather, her father, and she herself had endured during Jim Crow became part of a distant past, our family might become comfortable with their lives and forget our history. Also, she felt that now was the time for our family's story to be recognized as part of America's story. So I wrote that book, A Family History, and I thought it was fascinating, but my writing coach didn't agree. He said that it wouldn't be fascinating to anyone except my own family. So he suggested that I turn the book into a work of fiction so that my ancestors, now fictionalized characters, could speak on behalf of the millions of ancestors of African American families who had similar experiences, which included the brutalities of slavery, such as rape. So I wrote that book too, a novel. And I thought it was fascinating. But the members of my rigorous writing class didn't agree. They thought the story was interesting, but that my fiction was flat. And they told me the characters stayed on the page and did not evoke any emotions. But the class loved my prologue. It was the true story of how my mother came to hear the family stories and how I came to hear the family stories too. But I was not ready to write that book, a memoir. For one thing, I was not up to writing a third whole book. But more important, the credo had begun to bother me. For many years, I had wondered why, or even whether, the credo should make me proud. For me, it resounded with the abuses of slavery. I could not write a book until I understood and had reconciled all that the credo was saying. It was saying that some of my ancestors owned some of my ancestors and had had babies with some of those ancestors. I had to figure out this slavery thing and what, if anything, I could do about it now. So in 1992, I began my journey of discovery of my ancestors, our country, and myself. I traveled to Lagos, Portugal, where the transatlantic slave trade began, to Ghana, West Africa, where my family's first African ancestor in America and our first griot had been born. I went to Baltimore, Maryland, where a replica of a slave ship sits in a museum, to Central Texas, where my great-great-grandparents and their 8 sons learned they were free, to New York City, where an 18th century African burial ground had recently been discovered. And I went many times to Montpelier, James Madison's former plantation in Virginia, where 3 generations of my family had been enslaved. My travels taught me that wherever African slaves once walked, history had buried their footsteps. At the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, as slave ships sailed along, under a gaudy concession stand in Portugal, beneath a federal building near Wall Street, among the ashes of burned documents and personal papers in courthouses and in private homes, and below a brick walkway and in unmarked graves at Montpelier. But what was most helpful to me was that I also learned that enslaved people were remarkable individuals who possessed inner strength and a sense of hope by which they survived, and many talents by which they contributed tremendously to America. And when they died, they passed down those same qualities to those of us alive today. My ancestors and those of other African Americans, I came to realize, are best remembered not in carefully recorded names, dates, and places, not in letters, documents, and photographs kept in old cardboard boxes, and not even in family stories told from generation to generation. Our ancestors are best remembered in what we do with the gifts we inherited from the men and women who came before us. We are the evidence of what happened to the stolen Africans who had survived. The list of who we are and how we represent these astounding people is long, and the possibilities are infinite because we all have talents and strengths gifted to us from our ancestors held in bondage. I was a pediatrician in inner city Boston for more than 30 years, and I loved it. But all too often, my Black patients revealed to me that racism had convinced them that they didn't have any talents, and especially among teenage boys, that they weren't destined for anything except jail or an early grave through violence. Their lack of hope was heartbreaking. But I am convinced that by embracing their slave ancestry, our young Black people have much to gain and much to give. If they were encouraged to grab onto and nurture their own talents and their own inner strengths, they could believe in themselves and defy the looming specter of jail and an early grave. Like their enslaved ancestors, our young people can make contributions to America and they can have hope. My book, The Other Madisons, The Lost History of a President's Black Family, was published in March 2020. In the 30 years after receiving the box from my mother, I had become a griot who will not let her footsteps be buried. And I had discovered that it is the words, "You come from African slaves," in my family's credo that makes me proud. The Other Madisons is a personal, intimate memoir, but I am pleased when readers tell me it reminds them of stories about their own ancestors and encourages them to try to learn more about those men and women. And I am pleased I have figured out what I can do about this slavery thing that haunts every American. Spoiler alert, a little of what I figured out is in Eduardo's film you're about to see.
The first horn lifts its arm over the dew-lit grass, and in the slave quarters there is a rustling. Children are bundled into aprons, cornbread and water gourds grabbed, a salt pork breakfast taken. I watch them driven into the vague before dawn while their mistress sleeps like an ivory toothpick and Massa dreams of asses, rum, and slave funk. I cannot fall asleep again. At the second horn, the whip curls across the backs of the laggards, sometimes my sister's voice, unmistaken, among them. "Oh, pray," she cries, "oh, pray." Those days I lie on my cot, shivering in the early heat, and as the fields unfold to whiteness and they spill like bees among the fat flowers, I weep. It is not yet daylight.
Well, there's quite a story about my family, where they came from. And actually, we did not start out in Oakland. And my family started out in Ghana, West Africa, if we want to go back to the first of our ancestors in this country. And her name was Mandy. And Mandy was a young woman when she was captured from the shore near her village when she was alone. And so an amazing part of our family story, and probably many other African American family story is that they survived the Middle Passage, and then they had to survive the breaking in period, not just physically, but also emotionally, as they had to adapt to becoming an enslaved person where they had been free in Africa. Often when I would get fidgety, especially while she was trying to get me to stand still as she made fancy dresses for my piano recitals, my mother would bring out the box of family memorabilia and pull out items and tell me stories. Even before she started telling the stories, she would admonish me with our family credo, which has guided us for some 200 years. She would say, "Always remember, you're a Madison. You come from African slaves and a president." By repeating the credo at such times, she was telling me how proud she was of our ancestors, both white and black. But she was also letting me know how she was expecting me to behave. And the reasons were supported by those family stories that she was getting ready to tell me.
They can't tell you the name of the ship their ancestors came over on. They can't tell you the name of the village they were taken from. They probably can't tell you the names of the plantations that their families worked on, unless those plantations somehow, survived into their oral history, because that's how so much of these families' stories have been preserved, is through the oral tradition that they've passed down from family member to family member. And that's what Bettye's doing. She's the griot. She's the caretaker of her family's history. Good job.
Thank you.
Everybody, this is Eduardo Montes-Bradley, the filmmaker. He had a little technical difficulties joining us earlier, but he's back now.
Yeah.
I hope everybody enjoyed that film. I always love watching it, and it's great to be able to see you, Bettye. But I tell you, one of the things I love most about it is the fact that I get to turn that on whenever I want to and see Matt Reeves and Elizabeth Chu, who were sort of like my work family for years and years and years. And it's like getting to just turn on your little brother whenever you want to. But Bettye, tell us, why was it important for you to write this book? And what do you hope most readers will take away from it?
Well, writing this book was actually my life's purpose. And what I want people to take away from it, I have said in my presentation, and it is in the film, but it can't be said too often, is that enslaved people really were just amazing people. And, they had inner strengths and a sense of hope and talents and did so much for this country. And I want our young people to know that those same qualities are in them. And that, they too can have hope and make contributions to the country. And so, that message is my life's purpose.
What about you, Eduardo? Why was it important for you to make this film?
I think it is a story that, first of all, my relationship with Montpelier predated my my connection with this film. I met actually Bettye during a Juneteenth celebration in Montpelier. So there was this pending assignment for me, which was to actually make a film about Montpelier, a complete narrative film, which I wanted to do for many years. So the possibility of doing it through one of the most active descendants of the community, which has this life mandate to carry on with the griot story of her family, was the ideal, was a match made in heaven, in a match made in film heaven, in documentary film heaven. I thought it was an opportunity I did not want to miss. And it also, on my side, it contribute to further complete the series of films that I have made over the last 15 years on African-American issues. So it was it's a new chapter on a very long commitment on my part to make these films.
We've got some questions coming in from the outside world here. Bettye, it's been a 30-year process for you to write this book. How and when did visiting the archaeological site at Montpelier inform or affect your book? I think the person is asking, you know, where did that fall in the process that you described? You were talking about it sort of in the middle of the film, but where did that fall in your journey?
It was fairly early in the journey. It was around 1992 that I first went there. And
well, I was there.
Were you there?
Before I was there.
Before you were there. Okay. Yeah. Because I'm sorry, I don't remember you from that time. I certainly remember Lynn Lewis, who was the chief archaeologist at the time. And it was she who took me to the rear of the mansion and pointed out that path of bare soil that I was able to walk in, you know, where my ancestor had walked. So she who actually gave me that incredible, unparalleled experience. And I've continued to come to Montpelier over the years, and I learned something new with every trip. And, you know, the staff has always been very helpful, including you, Christian.
It's a good bunch of people at Montpelier for sure.
Yes.
We have a ton of compliments coming in on the chat, which are not questions, but we love to see compliments too. Somebody's asking, you said in the film, you said attention paid, that Madison Sr., right, paid attention to Mandy. And the question is rape the correct word to use?
Rape is the correct word. I was being careful, and I shouldn't have been. I should have just said it was rape.
Gail is asking, what types of artifacts do you have in that box from your family?
Well, I have birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses, lots of photographs, photo albums that different people put together over generations, sewing samples that, you know, because one of my ancestors was a seamstress. I had sewing samples. I have lots of letters. And one of my favorite artifacts is actually a letter from my grandfather written to me when I was a newborn, welcoming me into the world. And later he wrote another letter to me, or actually to my parents, about me, scolding them for not putting shoes on me, because if I didn't, my feet would get big and then the boys wouldn't like me.
Oh, Eduardo, we have a question for you. Person says, what a beautiful film that captures Betty's story so well. What was your process and inspiration for putting together this artwork?
The inspiration obviously is the story and Betty, which is the protagonist in her story. And what was the process? First, the process when you adapt a book to a film is to find the thread within the book that it has more chances to overcome the limitations of film. You can't tell all the stories within the book. All books have to be adapted. And here I saw a thread that was absolutely wonderful, which is to tell the story from the perspective of the women. So it starts with Monty, Corinne. We move very fast through the rest of the descendants, male, Jim and whatnot, and her grandfather. We mentioned them, but the key of the story is those two first women in her genealogy in America. Even the woman at the end in the demonstration in Washington in Washington on the Black Lives Matter Square, when she says, "You don't get it," is an Army veteran and it's a woman. So I wanted the film to be expressed from the perspective of Black women in America. So the creative process fell into that category. I mean, that was my north. That was my compass.
Thanks.
I just want to add something about the film. I'm very happy that I had this opportunity to do this film with Eduardo. It's another way of getting my message out, but the film also goes farther than the book does. So the film goes into more current day issues, particularly the Black Lives Matter. And, it puts it brings the whole book up into the present.
Yeah, because did you say you published the book in March of 2020?
Yes.
Yeah, and then you were doing a lot of the filming for the film through the summer and fall of 2020.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it was I thought it was a great addition to the story. It sort of brings it full circle in a way. Betty, somebody wants to know, has the Euro-American relations of the Madisons accepted your branch of the family tree?
Some of them have. I have met two women who call me cousin, and they're descendants of Madison sisters. But others haven't. Others just say, "Oh, there's Connie Graff just put up a message," and Connie is one of those descendants who calls me cousin. She says, "Hi, cousin." Yes. But there've been other members who have certainly not embraced me. I mean, they have not ever been mean or nasty to me at all, but they haven't been helpful either.
They haven't been helpful.
No.
We have another question here from Renee. I'm so glad Montpelier's Executive Vice President and Chief Curator, Elizabeth Chu, shout out to Elizabeth, recommended this book during my visit last week. I devoured it and look forward to including it in a new co-taught course at Bucknell titled Memories and Material Traces of Slavery. I was wondering if Dr. Kearse could speak about those 3 chapters called, quote, Mandy, that are slight variations of each other, beginning with, I cried when I saw you. You, my baby girl, were streaked with my blood.
Yeah, those are 3 of my favorite chapters. I love all the chapters in which Mandy speaks, but those are the most intimate. And during the process of writing the book, I felt closer and closer to Mandy, and she became part of me. And I came to be certain of what she wanted me to know and what she wanted me to share. But I also had to draw on my own experiences. So I have a daughter. My only child is a daughter. And I recall my own experiences as a new mother and imagined what Mandy must have felt as a new mother. So when I first saw my daughter, Nicole, I was scared to death. I just didn't know, just how to take care of her. And, she just appeared so fragile. So that first story about that first section where Mandy sees Corinne is more about her fear. And then the second section, she's becoming more comfortable with her role as a mother. And I was becoming more I recall becoming more comfortable with my role as a mother. And then finally, Mandy's triumphant. And I have this wonderful daughter, and I think I did a good job of raising her. And it is sort of my ultimate accomplishment. And it was really Mandy's ultimate accomplishment.
Somebody's asking if through your research and maybe through the DNA, have you found other relatives?
Through my research and through okay. I have met a young man whose name, this is very complicated though, but anyway, yes, I've met a young man whose name is Marvin Greer, who is who I matched through DNA, and we have similar histories, and we found out that we have common ancestors.
Eduardo, somebody's asking, where did you film Bettye in the beginning, and where did you film Christian? Both settings are beautiful and unique.
Thank you. Yeah, well, Bettye both were very difficult because we were in the middle of the worst part at the beginning of the COVID quarantine. And so I thought it needed a special strategy to bring it forward. So I got in a car and drove to Santa Fe to see Bettye keeping a 6-foot distance and all that. And I filmed her in the patio of her house outside. I saw that shadow with
yeah, it's a great line,
which I thought it was like the Dixon Mason line. It was kind of interesting in the back. It was an analogy. I thought it was pretty
light and dark.
Yeah, but it's the first time in my life that I have to build an entire film based on a single interview. It never happened to me. Never a protagonist. I always have more access, but here I had to hit and run. And what made it possible to work is that then I drove all the way to Maine to see you. So it's important to the establishing shots, so you know that people are in different places. Some don't quite understand that at the beginning, and they go like, well, but what is the relationship between a person in Maine and between one in Santa Fe? Well, if you were doing a documentary on Nietzsche or I don't know, Mussolini, you will have to interview somebody in New York, somebody in Los Angeles, and somebody in Moscow. So this is what happened. We had to get the stories together. So we filmed in Maine, we filmed in Virginia, we filmed in New Mexico. And help me out, anybody else? Any other locations here, Bettye?
No, the other ones were in different areas of Virginia.
Yes.
Yeah, Elizabeth and Lynn and Matt and Kelly were all in Virginia.
Yeah. But I was supposed to go to Virginia to be interviewed and filmed there, but I wasn't comfortable getting on a plane during COVID. So I think it speaks to Eduardo's determination and dedication to buy a new car, drag his wife and family, his wife and daughter to, what is it, 1,800 miles? Or?
I didn't want to rent a car because the paranoia was such that you didn't want to get into a car that somebody else have driven. So I went out and bought a new car just to make sure that nobody had been in that car before. And we slept in the car on the way to New Mexico. And it was interesting. I actually gave a couple of interviews, one for NPR during that trip.
Betty, do you see the comment here from your, I guess from your niece? I'm so proud to call you my Auntie Betty. Have you met or interacted with the other side of the Madison family since writing the book? And if yes, how have they treated you?
Not since writing the book. It's
been a weird year.
Pardon me?
I said it's been a weird year.
It's been a weird year. Yes, I haven't been anywhere really since writing the book. It was released on March 24th, 2020, which was the day that the governor of New Mexico put everybody on lockdown. So no, I haven't met anybody since then. I didn't see which niece that was.
Tari.
Oh, Tari. Tari Jane, yeah. That's not really her name, that's what I call her.
Somebody's asking, from the film, it sounds like yours is not an isolated case, that other slave women on the Madison plantation were raped. Have any other such descendants been identified from those lines?
Not that I know of. I believe that there are other families who have similar stories, but I really don't know for sure.
I'll take a crack at that too and just say that, you know, through the research that we did while I was still at Montpelier, which was up until the end of 2019, that there was nothing documented either through an open oral tradition like Betty has, or through the documentary record. But I always thought it would be an interesting study for some PhD student who's out there listening to take a look at the records that exist of the people who were born at Montpelier in the later part of the 18th century, and to see how many of those people were of mixed parentage, and then to try to figure out who those parents were, because there were certainly a number of children born at Montpelier who were listed in the records as being from mixed parentage. So that would be a good study for somebody to do. There's a question here that says, "Isn't Mr. Eduardo one of the most handsome directors?" I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
That was supposed to be private for you, and I sent it to everyone. I'm sorry. It was an inside joke.
Eduardo, is this the first documentary you've created based on a book?
Oh, no. I most recently that I can recall, there was the film about the experience of Private Milton Feldman during the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, and later his imprisonment in a POW camp. I made the film on his 95th birthday, and unfortunately he's no longer with us, but we do have the film to remember him by. And there are other films that I made with life stories that were based on books. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So far, I think I'm entering now with my new film on Black Fiddler. Is going to be my 100th film.
Your 100th film?
Yeah.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was.
Quite a milestone.
I think I need a vacation.
I was trying to do your intro. I was like, well, I'll just list all the films he's done. I was like, oh, forget that. Like, Leontini is asking, how can the general public view the film? PBS or another platform? Hi, Leontini.
Yes, we're experimenting. Now with Alexander Street Press, which is a major provider of content for universities and private libraries around the world. And we are definitely going to pitch the film to different PBS affiliates. The way that PBS works is you either go nationally before you make the film, or you pitch it to nearly 300 different PBS affiliate stations. Takes time, resources, money, efforts. But we have that support, so we're happy.
And I believe by tomorrow, this recording will be on the First Amendment Museum's website with a link to the film. Is that right, Eduardo?
Yes, that is correct. Yes.
So all of you who've seen it tonight and who thought it was fascinating and wonderful can send all of your friends to the First Amendment Museum, www.firstamendmentmuseum.org. And then look for the speaker series tab, and you can send them the link to the film.
And please support the First Amendment Museum. I think that the First Amendment today is so much more important than the second, and it comes first.
That's right. Well, we want you to buy Bettye's book as well, and to support the Heritage Film Project. Let's see, we got one more question here that's pretty good, and it's from Gail. Would you consider, Bettye, going on Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates to also publicize your story? I'm wondering if that's an invitation, if Gail has a way to get Bettye on Skip Gates's show. But go ahead, Bettye.
Of course I would.
Well, good. If Skip Gates is watching out there, you can contact me, you can contact Eduardo, you can contact Bettye, and any of us will get you in touch with Bettye to get on that show. firstamendmentmuseum.org/speaker series will take you to the show tomorrow. Bettye and Eduardo, thank you so much. It was a lot of fun working on the project, and really appreciate the opportunity for the First Amendment Museum to screen the movie. And thanks everybody for watching. We'll be back in 2 weeks with Chet Leonard to talk about disinformation. Doom, doom, doom.
Goodbye.